Hey everyone, thanks for joining. I see a lot of the attendees are coming on board right now. I'm going to give it a minute before we start the EDR section, but what I wanted to do first is I wanted to just kind of run through, for those of you who are not yet on the Sophos program, or you're not familiar with anything that we're doing a lot of stuff right now to support the MSP sales efforts. Things like the wireless desk and RFP desk. You know, if you have a RFP that you need to fill out for a customer, you can work with the sales team and the sales engineering team. We have XG sizing desks and migration desks. All that stuff is available. So reach out to your sales team. The other thing I wanted to mention is we have a fantastic YouTube channel. The YouTube channel is called Sophos MSP Global, and that can be viewed up on YouTube, obviously, but we are going to post this recording as well as every other webinar that we've done, pretty much ever, is up there. It's also available in multiple languages, including German and Dutch and several other languages. We also have a MSP Flex integration community page. For those of you who are not aware, we recently launched a ConnectWise plugin for ConnectWise Manage. That's available. I'll post it in the chat. We also have Datto integration and Kaseya integration and several others. So I'll post that link. And then lastly, we recently launched a Facebook community page. It's called Sophos MSP Connect Flex. So if you're up on Facebook and you want to join into the conversation, please do so on that page. So without any further ado, I want to thank everybody that's joining today. I'm very excited about this. I know that there's been a lot of chatter on the Slack channels and a lot of the Facebook and LinkedIn and community pages that are out there about the Sophos EDR v3 with Live Discover. My name is Scott Barlow, if you don't recognize the voice. I'm Vice President of Global MSP. I am very excited to have Karl Ackerman today. Karl basically is the man when it comes to everything EDR. So Karl, without any further ado, I want to turn it over to you so you have as much time as possible to get this up and running and moving forward.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, Scott. I really appreciate getting the time to chat with everyone here. And I think I'm sharing a screen. Can you see the full screen Intercept X with EDR?
I sure do, yes.
Fantastic. So as managed service providers, you guys really have an opportunity with the EDR 3.0 product to create some additional billable services. And I want to go through some of the core features in the product. I'll go through a demo to explain what we've added for Live Discover and Live Response. I'll also talk a little bit about the roadmap. And I know a lot of you will be interested in API access. So just to make everyone aware, this month, you'll see a notification coming out from Sophos that API access to the features I'm going to show you today is going to be available. So you'll be able to, through an API, connect up to a tenant, issue a query, take a look at the results, perhaps have that query send information off to an external SIEM environment. The other thing on the roadmap is we are building out a data lake version of what I'll show you today, and that is open right now to a private EAP for term license accounts only, but for all of you guys, it comes out in February for early access. So you'll have a new data lake interface in the February timeframe, again with APIs and some new capabilities. But with that said, let's sort of get everyone level set on what we're talking about today and where things are going. So Sophos offers a number of products, from Intercept X standalone best protection, Intercept X with EDR. We have a managed threat response. We have rapid response for accounts that have been breached. We're focusing on the middle here, Intercept X with EDR. That's the product that deploys on the endpoint with all of the layers of protection that you need for a best protection story. Stop the bad guy for both known and unknown malware, rollback ransomware attacks, I think industry leading by far anti-exploit capabilities. It's got a neural network machine learning model on it. All of that's great for offering the best protection to your account. What EDR is doing is saying, how can we provide a set of tools that can be either used directly by the customer or the managing partner to perform basic IT operations, everything from understanding how much disk space is left on some Linux server, or if a Windows box has been patched lately, to the full threat hunting capabilities that we use ourselves in rapid response and breach response. So a full capability of doing deep forensics on a device to understand, is a breach underway? How's it happening? What's the adversary doing? Getting into the ability to do hand-to-hand combat effectively with a nation state that's penetrated an environment and win and kick them out. And to date, the Sophos rapid response team is going to be using the same capabilities I'll show you, and they've won every one of those engagements, usually within hours, identifying the adversary's presence in the environment and actually mitigating that attack and rolling back the damage that's been done, removing compromised systems, cleaning up environments that have been breached, identifying information that's needed for law enforcement. That all of those capabilities from our rapid response team are what's sort of at your fingertips with the Intercept X with EDR. The reason we built it, and the reason we built it the way we did, was we were really looking at solving a couple of real problems that all organizations face around the time it takes to actually do their regular job. Can we make general IT operations faster and more efficient? And we said, yeah, we want to tackle that. We want to make everyday tasks easier and faster with the Intercept X with EDR product. Now, most of you probably have other tools in the environment to do things similar to this. This allows you to consolidate down to a single tool for that direct device management. You need hands-on keyboard on a device that's in Samoa and you're sitting in Ohio. You can launch our live response terminal, and you have a privileged admin session on that box. You can go do anything you want, run PowerShells, grab system memory, install an application. So general day-to-day IT stuff should be able to be done much easier and more efficiently with Intercept X with EDR. We also realize that people lack the resources to actually do the job, and finding skilled resources for security operations in particular is difficult. The people that are able to do digital forensics and machine analysis cost a lot to hire and retain, have a very unique set of skills. And we said, can we provide a product that's easy enough to use for your general IT admin to perform those operations themselves? So what can we build into the product to accelerate that ability for an admin to understand what's happening in the environment, determine that it's a threat, and to take action? And then the biggest challenge we hear from everybody from IT ops to security is they don't know what the hell's happening in the environment. So let's give full visibility into the environment, everything about everything. So with Intercept X with EDR v3, you can now search for anything you can imagine. And I really want to state the breadth of that capability to search for anything and the speed. And you'll see this in the demo in just a few seconds. Intercept X for IT operations. You can ask questions like, why is a machine running slow? Does it have a pending reboot? Are there all the services up? Is BitLocker been successfully deployed out to these boxes? Are there bad certificates on the box? Is the user actually logged in? What applications are they running? Those types of everyday questions that hit the IT team should be able to be answered with this product. So it should be trivial for you to ask that question of one device, 1,000 devices, 10,000 devices, with the APIs to script that to ask it across your entire set of customers that you're running with EDR, and get an answer back quickly. And we had an account when we were in early access last year, or probably very early this year. Early access at an account, they said, yeah, we want to participate in the early access program. We love Sophos. We want to provide feedback. They'd had the early access product for a couple of weeks, and I called them up and said, hey, I haven't seen you guys doing anything with this. What's up? And the guy apologized. The IT admin said, look, I just don't have time right now. our organization just acquired another one. We've got Sophos rolled out, and I need to know, have they completed their upgrade from Windows 7 to Windows 10 across all those devices? And is BitLocker enabled? These basic questions. And he said the other teams aren't being helpful. So it's taking a lot of his time to go track down how to do that. In a world of COVID where every device is at someone's home, it was a particular challenge. I said, well, let me show you what you can do with Intercept X, and crafted 2 queries for him on the phone with him, and gave him answers to what machines have upgraded from Windows 7 to Windows 10, which ones are still pending, is BitLocker successfully enabled. And all of a sudden, it took a task that he was worried about having to spend days and weeks sort of divining through his systems to try and get answers for, to something where he had his answer, he had the query, he could run it whenever he wanted. And now all of a sudden, his IT operations tasks became smaller, so he got the opportunity to start looking at threat hunting and what we could do with that. And when we get to threat hunting, we have access to everything on the box. So the foundation technology that we used when we built out EDR 3.0 was a technology called OSQuery. OSQuery is effectively taking a Windows, Mac, or a Linux box and rendering the entire runtime state of that machine as a database. It was built by Facebook as open source. It has hundreds of tables, everything from the ARP cache to the file system to the registry to, I think on the Macs, you can even get the temperature of the CPU. So all of those tables are available for interrogation, and that's a great tool for the current running state of a device. What we wanted to do with EDR, though, when we looked at security operations, we realized that to really be able to answer what happened when a breach has been ongoing is you needed to be able to look back in time. So Intercept X includes a data recorder. We record all processes, network connections, registry interactions, interactions with the file system, all of the threads of those processes, their image loads. All of that's been recorded and stored locally on the device. That historic data typically goes back about 90 days. And when you look at the need to understand how did I get breached, often the adversary may have been in the environment for weeks or months. So that 90-day access to the historic activity is really critical. And with that access to the historic data, all of a sudden you get to look back in time. And we said, how do I make all of these tables and all of this historic information available to an IT admin? And what OSQuery had done, which I think was brilliant because we've carried it forward, is said as a database, it's a relational database, you can run SQL queries against it. And the type of query you can run is pretty close to unlimited. SQL as a programming language is what's called Turing complete, which means you can emulate anything you want in a SQL query, which means, for example, I can go ahead and run a query that says, go look for all the network connections that happened 3 weeks ago. Given the results of what we found, go look up on the internet the geolocation of where those communications have happened and give it back to me as a result. And once you've written such a query once, it's available for you to use anytime in the future. And Sophos also realizes that even though SQL is sort of a computer science 101 course, not everyone is going to be as versed in SQL as they might like to be. So in addition to letting you write your own queries and save them, we ship with about 100 canned queries. And those queries are really focused around what does an IT operations task look like? What does a security operations task look like? Let's build the queries for those. Let's also provide a community for people to share that information with each other. And we realize once you've found something interesting in the environment, you need to get and take an action on that device. And often that action is something beyond what Sophos can do directly from the console, like isolate the device or classify a particular SHA as malware. Maybe you need to go in and change a registry key. And to do that, we needed to give you a real-time console access to the box and a privileged console. So with live response, you have a system level access to the box running a shell on Windows, Mac, or Linux. You can run PowerShell. You can dump, as I said, you can dump memory, you can run scripts, you can upload and download files from file shares. It's fully audited. It requires two-factor authentication to turn on. You have the ability to disable it for some devices. So maybe you don't want your IT team able to log into the CEO's box. So you'll put that on a restricted list. And then the IT team can go into any other box and have this sort of real-time console. And this real-time ability to go in and make a precise change on a device is really unparalleled. Most of the other vendors that have begun to look at this capability build you a constrained remote shell, where they may provide a couple of helper functions, but they don't really want to give you full admin access. We said, let's start from the other side and give full admin access with a robust audit log. So everything that the admin does is going to be logged, it's going to be available for review. All of the results from the commands that they've been typing will be available for review. And then let's put it behind some role-based access controls. So with that, it's intended to make you work faster, do more with less, i.e. the Sophos Intercept X with EDR product enables all of these capabilities. Let's take an actual look at it in action.
Hey, Karl, before you do that, I had a question here. ADQuery, I would like to have the Sophos client look at the Active Directory machine and compare and report which machines don't have AV.
Yeah, absolutely. So if you just wanted to look at are Sophos services up and running on every box, or is the firewall enabled on every box? There are queries for that. So we've come into the Threat Analysis Center, we've gone to Live Discover. And we'll take that as our first challenge is, can I see if Sophos is up and running on all of these boxes? You'll note you have a device selector capability. For large accounts that have thousands of devices, you might not want to ask all of them. Maybe you're asking just the ones in the US geographic region. So you have a number of ways of setting your filter for which devices you want to ask. Once you've determined what devices you're interested in asking, you need to determine what the question is. So I think our question was around Sophos, but you can see we've broken out categories, but we'll do a generic search. Oh, that's probably going to find everything. Let's look for AV. AppArmor, CVEs, chocolate tree packages. I think I've got services. I don't remember what we named that. Are Sophos services installed and running on the device? It's a canned query. It's one that I added, which means it's up available on the community forum. A couple of things to note here. You saw that search capability. So it searches across all of the information about all the queries you have in your system and shows you the ones that match. Now that I've selected the query, you can actually see the syntax. It's looking at a table called services. So that's one of the OSQuery tables for a path that contains Sophos or Hitman in it and looking for the status of running. So this is looking at the running services on the box. The expected performance is excellent. This query shouldn't return a lot of data, and it should take under a second to execute once it reaches the device. We'll go ahead and issue that query out. And you can see down here at the bottom, we're starting to get some results coming in. So we can see that the Sophos Web Intelligence Service was set to auto start. It's currently stopped. So there's a service that's down that should be up. You can see on the victim 3 machine as well, all other Sophos services are up. So this was status is not running. If we wanted to say, well, show me all of the Sophos services, and you didn't like this query, you could go ahead and modify it. And you could say, well, let's just turn off the and status is running, and let's look for all Sophos services in their state. And now we'll rerun that query, and we'll see what else we can see. If we decide we really like this query, it's more useful for what we were looking for, you could go ahead and save it or perhaps give it a different name. But now you've got a query to say, hey, just give me the status of the Sophos services. Are they up and running? And you can get this report back. The reports on this central side are limited to 100,000 rows of data. It's about 250 per page. You can sort all of these results as they come in. You could export them out if you wanted to build a prettier report. And as I said, in the next couple of weeks, we'll be turning on APIs. So if you wanted to run this on some regular interval and have the results piped into your external systems, you could. You can see here, we've defined the type of output we want. So each one of these columns in the select statement ends up being one of the results. If we wanted them in a different order, we could do that, or if we wanted different data. So say we were saying, let's just show me everything that's available in the services table. I'll change that to a wildcard, but I'm still going to restrict it to the Sophos services. Now you can see everything that's available with the services table. And you can see here, we can scroll off to the right. There's a number of things: path, description, user account, its start type, entry and exit codes, the PID of the process that's currently running. It gets fairly rich. And what we found from an IT operations perspective, that ability to imagine a question that you want to ask and go ahead and get that answer quickly is really powerful. Folks love that ability. And as an MSP, you could, if you wanted to, build a service around, hey, we're going to monitor current CVEs, and we're going to tell you whether or not you have a vulnerable app based on the current CVE that's out there. So what I did for the CVE information was I said, let's search for CVEs for any currently installed application. It's a little more complicated of a query. It's going to go ahead and get a list of all of the apps on the device, generate their manufacturer, the version, and the name of the application, and then it's going to go ahead and look out at the CVE details website with a Karl request to say, hey, let's do a search against the CVE details website for matches on product name, version, and manufacturer, and give me a result list. So effectively what this is doing is it's looking at all of the installed apps on my device and saying, is there a published CVE for any applications that are currently installed on my device? It isn't by any means a full-powered vulnerability scanner, but all of a sudden it's a good enough vulnerability scanner. It's able to get current information of apps that are on the device. Maybe I only wanted to look at running apps. I could write a different query there. And it's identified Nmap has a current CVE for it for the version that I have. I provide the link out to the CVE details site so you can read more. My notepad has a vulnerability on it as well. That's some of the core capability. And as I said, if you take a look at the tables that are available, I think I have a query that just dumps the schema for the Sophos components. In this case, we're asking each endpoint to go ahead and show the entire schema that's available on each of them. You can see here application shims, the ARP cache, auth code information, auto exec information, Azure instances. It goes down and down to almost anything you're interested in. And what's important is because we're leveraging OSQuery, it's an active open source project, and we're snapping to current version of OSQuery about once a quarter. So as OSQuery continues to get extended and more tables get added to it, you'll see those become available in Sophos. So if we want to look at the schema available in OSQuery, I think we're right now on 4.4, maybe going up to 4.5 at the end of the year. You can see 258 different tables that are available. Maybe I'm interested in just the tables available on my Linux machines, 149, everything from the Karl table, which you saw me using to reach out to the internet, to Docker container information, ELF information, known hosts, kernel info. A lot of this information, when you look at it, it's relatively opaque, and how do I find something valuable out of it? But the data's there, and what Sophos has done to make it more valuable is we've built the canned queries. So you're interested in information on devices. So maybe it's the boot history of a machine. And to get the boot history, we had to go ahead and look through Windows events. All of the Windows events are on the system. Windows events are stored in the table in a JSON structure, so we've gone ahead and parsed that out. But I can go ahead and run a query once it's crafted as often as I want and say, well, what's the boot history of all of my devices? Maybe I'm interested in understanding when does this machine go through a safe boot mode. And I can issue that query out. And the other thing you've got is if you're not familiar with how to write SQL or familiar with OSQuery, we're here to help. So Sophos has an early access program, and on the early access program, we have a community forum. That community forum for Intercept X has a section for query writing, where people can post queries that they would like to see, or queries that they're having trouble getting to work. So you come over here, live discover and response query forum. Here was a query I wrote because the back last month, I think the FBI and CISA informed all of the healthcare organizations that Ryuk and TrickBot were targeting them as ransomware attacks and active adversary campaign. What we did with this query was we said, let's reference the Sophos naked security or uncut security article. So Sophos Labs is researching attacks and adversaries all the time. You're probably familiar with the Sophos naked security articles. There's also a type of article called Sophos Uncut. The uncut articles include a reference to the CSV file for all of the IOCs that we found related to that actor. So here you can see we have a table. It identifies a type of IOC, the information that needs to be used to match on it, and the actual indicator that it maps to. And we said, hey, we're building a query that wants to go and pull this information from the GitHub. So Sophos has a GitHub location where all of this data is published. And we want to run a query to say, are those indicators of compromise present in my environment? And what this does is it goes ahead and takes the URL for the CSV and then performs a hunt to say, have I been exposed to Ryuk and TrickBot based on the current set of indicators that Sophos has published? And we update those indicators as we're finding more. So you could go ahead and run this query in an environment that's worried about that FBI or CISA alert that they just saw and say, you're not at threat. Or we found evidence that the adversaries had attacked your organization and we need to investigate. And this is where it gets really exciting, is when you can get to start doing those investigations. So let's go back into the Threat Analysis Center and take a look at this from a security operations perspective, a team that's actually going to hunt for active adversaries. And one of the things we've seen happening in the industry is a lot of what we're seeing for adversarial tactics and techniques is beginning to standardize from a non-government organization called MITRE ATT and CK framework, which is a mapping of all of the tactics and techniques that we see for adversaries to well-defined descriptions. So here's one that's mapping about 160 different tactics and techniques to a test tool called Caldera. Caldera runs a penetration tool in your environment. It doesn't run much in the way of malware. It's got Sandcat, which we would recognize as malware, but a lot of what it's doing is just things that are what are called live off the land techniques. Maybe it's dumping some registry key, or it's setting an auto run process. And we want to say, in our environment, in the last 4,800 hours, have we seen any evidence of the tactics and techniques used by the Caldera test tool? And this would also identify if an adversary was, say, doing an NS lookup or an NB stat, and give you a list of things that might be worthy of hunting. So we've kicked that query off and we're going to let it run. It's a little bit more complicated query, and it's looking back over a number of days. So it'll take a couple of seconds to run. And you can see that, I haven't run this one recently, so it doesn't have current performance stats on it. You can also see whether or not it's completed. down at the bottom with the telemetry information. So we have one device that's completed. It took 30 seconds to run. It's identified a number of tactics and techniques used by adversaries, and it's shown you what it's found about them. So here we have someone was trying to do a domain controller discovery using PowerShell. We've identified the process that did that and the time that that process launched. We actually have the command line that was used as well. And maybe we want to say, well, I'm interested in knowing what else was happening with that PowerShell. So I'm taking a piece of evidence called a Sophos process ID, which is just the process ID plus the start time. I'm going to say, I want to know more about that. So we'll take that and we'll go and run a different query. And this gets into what security operations teams have to do all the time. So in this case, I want to see the historic process activity for that command. What was its parent and what were its children's activities? So let's look back in time, and I think this is looking back about a month and a half to say, show me all of the processes that were had to start for this to run and what else it did. So here you can see there's the PowerShell we were looking for. It ran NL test, and its parent was the real schedule running out of the public directory. That's probably my rat. And maybe I want to say, well, what else did this do? And now I'm pivoting back even further in time and saying, show me things that were related to the rat, the remote access terminal that was deployed by the adversary. And we'll go ahead and run that query. And you can see here in the query, it's doing recursion. You guys don't have to know recursion. If you do, you can write your own queries that use recursion. But it's a canned query. It's out of the box. It's performing a lookup of parent-child relationships and saying, what did this process, how did it start? Its parents back to system boot. You can see this is back in October that this attack was run. What else did it do? And you have a list of everything that it was doing, all of the command lines, the SHA-256 of the process that was done, everything that's happening here. These aren't malware. This is PowerShell is a legitimate system tool. Task list is a legitimate system tool. They're all things, though, that we now know are related to an attack. And maybe we want to go ahead and do something about that box and take it offline and isolate it. So we could go into here, we could isolate the box, or we could go ahead and say, maybe we want to go in and log into that box directly. And when you get into sort of less advanced hunting, maybe you're just worried about understanding the attack surface of your environment. And you're aware that RDP is often used by adversaries to start their attacks. So we have a query here that says, is RDP listening? Do I have any boxes that have an open RDP port listening for a remote connection? Adversaries could go out to Shodan, an open source tool that scans the internet looking for a little bit of everything, but they could ask Shodan as a search tool, are there any machines with open RDPs? It would give them a list of machines. They could then go to the darknet and say, is anyone selling passwords for those machines? And you can buy a password for an average server in the US for about $2. That'll connect over RDP. Here we can see I have 3 boxes that have open RDP sessions. They're listening. They don't necessarily have an active connection. Another query would show me that. Now, maybe as an admin, I want to go ahead and fix that. There's no way directly in Sophos to disable RDP. You'd have to isolate the box. But maybe I do want to go in and actually disable it directly. So I'm going to start a live response terminal. Now, I hope what you're seeing as managed service providers is all of a sudden this is opening up the ability for you to move from MSP to MSSP. You have the same tools we use for deep forensics hunting, or as an MSP, this is something giving you a toolkit to go ahead and do your job faster. So I've now connected to the machine. I'm in as an admin. I can go ahead and run anything I want. I want to go ahead and look at how do I disable RDP from the command line. And these guys look like they have an answer to enable it, to disable it. I'll go ahead and run this registry change. We'll go ahead and paste that in. It says that the operation's completed successfully. Let's go back to Live Discover and see if the victim 5 machine actually is reporting now that it's no longer listening for active RDP sessions. So we'll go ahead and run is RDP listening again. We're going to ask all of our devices. And we can see that the victim 5 machine is no longer listening for RDP. So effectively, as an admin, I identified an attack surface I was unhappy with. I've completed the mitigation. It's logged my session, required 2-factor authentication. Basically, I can go on to the next task. That ability to perform a task rapidly is profound with this product. So about 4 months ago, Sophos started offering rapid response. It was skunkworks at the time. I think we just announced it in last month as a generally available capability. But what rapid response was intended to do was engage with both Sophos and non-Sophos accounts that are actively under attack and say, can we come in and help? And often what these accounts are doing is they're sort of pulling the ripcord on their insurance policy, and they're getting in a digital forensics team to go ahead and perform investigations. Sophos had been involved in those in the past. We thought we could now do them much better and more cost effectively than any competitor out there. So we've been brought into dozens or hundreds of them at this point. One of them that sort of jumps to mind is early on, we had a European defense contractor that was being breached by a nation state. They had Sophos deployed on a couple of servers, but they didn't have it on all of their infrastructure, and they knew they were under attack. So international law enforcement was involved. The organization reached out to us as well as a number of other forensics teams and called us in. So within about 2 hours of that initial call, we have a rapid response team that's actively performing the investigations. What happened in this case is law enforcement was coordinating the investigation because they had multiple digital forensics teams involved. They had asked us, the Sophos team, can you determine if the asset, in this case some sensitive documents, was accessed by the adversary? If so, when was it accessed, and do we know what they did with it? And they sort of set us that task while other organizations in the digital forensic space were busy capturing disk images and installing their initial tools. We rolled out the Intercept X onto the boxes and started running some queries. In about 45 minutes from the initial ask, we were able to tell law enforcement that yes, the asset had been accessed. It had been exfiltrated to a Dropbox location. Here was the password for that remote location. Here's the account that was compromised for the attack. Here's other assets in the environment that were also compromised. When law enforcement saw that report and the speed with which we gave it to them, their mouths were just hanging open. They didn't think some of the things we were able to see were possible. Because we have 90 days worth of recorded information down to the thread level, we can actually identify when, say, a remote object has been directly loaded from some network location into another process. We'll identify that that happened. We'll go ahead and be able to identify even the image that was brought in. This ability to rapidly respond under duress is really amazing with this product. One of the things that that team wanted, they said, we keep running into, it's common for adversaries to do something called Base64 encode data. So they're trying to hide instructions in a Base64 encoded PowerShell. So I said, well, I've got SQL. I can probably decode the Base64 instructions of every PowerShell in the environment. So I wrote a little query to do just that. This goes ahead and determines whether or not the PowerShell has encoded data in it. It discovers where the encoded data is, and then it decodes it. Does a Base64 decode, converts it to a hex form, strips out some nulls, and voila, when you run this, you get a decoded version of all of the Base64 encoded PowerShells in the environment. I gave them an option to say maybe you want to see all PowerShells or just the ones with encoding, but they were able to run this across an account with, I think, 2,000 machines. And they said the response time for this was about 30 seconds, and the first 1,000 machines had come back with their results, and it took another 30 seconds to get all the others back. So here we have the command line information that was seen. You can see this is a Base64 encoded PowerShell -E with some hard to understand set of information. The decoded version of this is actually the Windows load of the image. On this one down here, you have an encoded PowerShell, and the decode here is an image load from Empire Project for a little utility called invoke Mimikatz. So from the encoded information, it's hard to see that Mimikatz is trying to be invoked. From the decoded information, it's trivial. And here's a remote object load, a remote library load of a DLL being directly injected into another process. And you can see we have the location that it was being downloaded from and the process that was involved. So maybe we want to know what else did this Sophos process ID do? And this is where you get into the concept of pivoting and sort of the more advanced hunts. And you've already seen a tree, but let's take a look at that one. Process tree for a Sophos PID. That's the one we're looking for. What else was this doing? And we should be able to see its parent-child relationships as well. So if your team is interested in doing threat hunting and offering threat hunt capabilities, this tool blows away the competition in the fidelity of information that it has and the speed with which it's able to get those answers back. So here you can see it was running the regserve process, but it was a direct command line. So I think I was just testing by hand. And we can also get, well, what was the user running that process? I think here you can see we get the ML scores of it and its global reputation as well. If you're interested in doing better IT operations for your customers, providing regular vulnerability scans for things that have hit the news, checking on whether or not, you know, hey, maybe I'm just interested in the disk space on all my machines. I can get basic disk information, disk encryption status, physical disk, percent disk space used. And I just want to provide that as a report saying, hey, a couple of your servers are running low on disk space. You can run those reports for them now. This ability to ask any question and get an answer quickly is what we're really excited about. And I hope as partners, you guys are getting excited about as well. That's what's currently shipping. And I wanted to jump to a little bit about where we're going with this next. Often what we hear from folks who've seen this is they're aware of competitors in this space that have decided to do the same type of information with a data lake. Yes?
I would love to pause you for a second because we have some questions coming in, and Steve Weber, thank you for jumping in and helping to answer those. Couple of the questions, do you have the CVE example published?
Yeah, that's up on the community forum.
Okay, great. There's actually a case or a scenario. If you're a healthcare practice, is there the ability to alert when a large print job is sent to a printer, say 50 pages or more, something like that?
You can, that there's a print queue information's available on Mac, so you can see the Mac's print history. On a Windows environment, what you would have to be looking for is identifying where there are print servers in your environment and then looking for network connections going to that port that have exceeded some size limit. So you can get all of the size information of the communication on the 5 tuples. So sending port, destination port, and process, and IP address. So yes, you could do such a thing. I'd want to understand that environment. I don't think I could do a generic one that works for all print servers.
Okay. I think you also mentioned in terms of how far back can you search, is it 90 days?
About 90 days. Sometimes it goes further. It depends on the how heavily used that system is. So my demo environment, I don't use heavily. We store up to 4 gigabytes of compressed information, ends up being about 30 gigabytes of historic data. That averages out to about 90 days on a typical machine. On some, it could be 150 days. On other, it might be 60.
And is that stored locally or in the cloud?
Stored on the device. You don't want to send gigabytes worth of information up to the cloud, especially this kind of information.
Got it. There's a lot of questions about the recording. The recording will be posted on the YouTube page. I did post a link to the YouTube page, to the Facebook group, and several other pertinent links in the chat. There's a couple other questions here. Can you run custom PowerShell through this and return it as part of a query?
The ability to, as a query, execute a PowerShell command is not supported in OSQuery or from us. If you needed to run a custom PowerShell, you're really looking at live response and then the execution of that PowerShell there. One of the things we're looking at a future release, so not available today, is the ability to effectively script an execution of something over multiple remote sessions. But today it's on a per device, you'd log in, you'd run your PowerShell. And you wouldn't be able to do it as part of a query.
Got it. Can you have the templates preloaded?
All of those queries are all preloaded. So we ship with about 100. There's another 100 or so on the community forum. We're adding several every 3 weeks. So we have a 3-week release cycle. I think the ones I'm asking the engineers to work on right now is the Sophos uncut articles, the ability to just drop in a URL for an uncut article and perform a scan. That one's coming out at the end of the month. We just published a bunch of queries for Carbonac and Fin7. So MITRE's tests this year are around the threat actor Carbonac and Fin7. So we generated some queries to go look for their particular TTPs, and those are now public.
Great. Is live discovery for Mac available?
Yes.
Excellent. I was hoping you answered a little bit longer so I can go to the next question. There's some good feedback, Karl.
Yes, it's a live response and live discover. Both work on Windows Server, Mac, and Linux. On Windows endpoints, we're down to Windows 7. I don't believe we don't have anything for XP, and Windows 7 is about to enter extended support. What we had to do to get it to work on Windows 7 is the OSQuery native is 64-bit. Windows 7, we needed a 32-bit version. So we rewrote the core drivers of OSQuery and provided that back out to the open source community. So we're actively contributing to the growth of OSQuery as well.
Cool. All right, I'm going to let you continue here because there's a lot of other questions and I'm trying to wrap my arms around it. So why don't you continue and then we'll answer some more questions at the end.
Sure. I just wanted to give you an idea of where we're going. So what we just saw in that demo and the deep dive through it, the endpoints needed to be available to ask the question. What we found from our engagement with law enforcement and accounts that are breached is almost always that's going to be the case. You can take that device and you can put it into an isolation state so that the adversary no longer has access to it. You can still run your queries and do your live terminal response to it. There's a lot of FUD out there that the device data and information needs to be in the cloud because what if that device is in someone's trunk or is offline or has been destroyed by the adversary? The reality is those are rare scenarios, but we recognize them as valid scenarios. So Sophos is building a data lake version of this where a subset of the information that's available on the endpoint will be put up into a cloud environment. That's right now in a private EAP for termed license accounts. If anyone's interested, they have a termed license account, they can shoot me an email and we can get you involved in that EAP. The EAP for Data Lake, though, goes public and would be available for all our MSSPs. We're looking at the February timeframe with availability in June. That data lake will have 7 days worth of data in it. It will also have information from non-endpoint products, so the Sophos Firewall, and we're adding email and we'll be adding third-party firewalls. It's the same data lake that's used by our threat hunt team. So the collaboration between accounts that have Sophos Managed Threat Response and Sophos Central will just get tighter and easier. As I said, we'll be putting firewall data in there. So if you're familiar with the Sophos Firewall and Cloud Firewall Reporting, all of the information available in Firewall Reporting is in the data lake, which means you can now do interesting correlations of information. So maybe you're interested in, show me all of the devices in my environment that are not managed by Sophos. Today, you could do that on an endpoint by looking at ARP tables. With the firewall, we have a much better way of doing it because it has the MAC address and IP address of everything that's transited it, and we can compare that to the endpoints that have been reporting in information and give you a list of these are devices that are transiting the network that don't have Sophos. You also get the ability to do some interesting attack graphs where an adversary may be moving laterally through managed and unmanaged devices, and the firewall allows us to build up that graph. You'll be able to schedule queries to run at a regular interval and a future date and to send you those results. So right now, you could run them by hand or you could use the API to force a query to run on some interval. We'll be putting that into the console. You saw how I pivoted. When I took a Sophos process ID, I had to go find the process tree query and then paste it in. I wanted to get it to be even faster. So what we'll be adding in this upcoming release is the ability for us to understand the results of all queries. So we'll be context aware of the results, and we'll be aware of the information that's being shown in the cell and what the relevant next query could be. So in this case, we're on an IP address. We know we have a couple of queries, or maybe you as a customer have added some queries that take IP address as inputs, as variables, and we would make those available and allow you to one click over to the next query. It should accelerate hunting quite a bit. The other thing is, often you want information that's not in Sophos. So you saw us using a curl statement to go request some threat intel or the CSV details. What we wanted to do was open you up to the full set of threat intelligence that Sophos Labs collects. So Sophos Labs, 30 years of malware reverse engineering and building best protection capabilities. We have our own honeypots. We subscribe to about 40 or so different threat intel feeds. Those threat intel details are currently available with Sophos Labs IntelliX APIs. What we'll be doing is plumbing those IntelliX APIs directly into the console. So if you had a SHA-256 or an IP or domain and you wanted the Sophos Labs information on that, you could just go ahead and simply click to the enrichment. We also realize that you're not always going to be enriching with Sophos data. You may be enriching with external third parties. So the ability to define where your enrichment is, the URL, and we'll perform a string substitution and lookup. So you can get virus total, who is, or even paywall-based systems, because they'll prompt you for authentication when you navigate to that URL. So one-click enrichments will be in, OneClick Actions. So if you know something and you want to go ahead and isolate a box or tell the firewall to put something on a blacklist for an IP address, you should be able to do that directly from the evidence. So one-click actions where, again, it'll be context aware, very similar to pivoting and enrichments, but it'll go off and take actions. Additional data sources are coming. I expect email probably by mid next year. Optics is already in the Intercept X with EDR in a lightweight version. It'll become more tightly plumbed, and we'll be able to get data from firewall. And as I said, we're looking at third-party firewalls as well. All of that information in the data lake. For folks interested in APIs, maybe you're not interested in the Sophos data lake, but you've got your own. About the July timeframe next year, we'll have an API that allows you to take a copy of the Sophos data lake into your own S3 bucket. So if you wanted that for your SIM or your QRadar or your Splunk system, you could go ahead and do that. We'll also have the ability, when we launch, to have APIs that run queries. But if you wanted to effectively get a copy of the entire stream of data as it goes into our S3 bucket, we'd be able to fork it out to you probably in the July timeframe. And this is, if you do have an account that's a term license, you can send us an email at interceptbeta@sophos.com, and we can get you involved in the data lake early access program, which is right now API access to the data lake. And then this goes public. You won't need to email us at that point in February. You'll see it light up in the console. Do we have more questions?
We have a lot of questions. But you know what? I think based on what you're talking about right now, I want to kind of give everybody the heads up, and maybe you, Karl, could talk a little bit about MTR. I know you were instrumental with the team and Rook, and basically Sophos has pivoted to also help MSPs that don't have your own SOC or NOC or source system internally, that you can actually leverage the Sophos MTR, the Managed Threat Response Service, so that we can operate in two different ways. One is standard and one is advanced. That's the two product versions. If you go with advanced, which we recommend, it's basically going to give you the ability to get notified, collaborate with our team, or authorize our team to go and do remediation. So, Karl, maybe you can just touch upon this real quick, because I think it also ties very nicely into EDR with the endpoint, cloud optics, and XG firewall.
Oh, absolutely. So Sophos Managed Threat Response, as Scott was saying, it's a service that Sophos offers. You can resell it. Effectively, when a customer buys that, they get to they effectively have bought 24/7, 365 security operations monitoring of their environment. And we will both be actively looking for indicators of compromise in that environment and performing investigations. At the advanced level, we do what's called ad hoc threat hunting, where we just browse through the information looking for suspect. At the base level, we're getting notifications of all of the interesting things that warrant investigation, and it'll kick off an investigation. There's a couple of tiers of notification, everything from just tell us what you found and give us a recommendation, to you're fully authorized to go ahead and kick the adversary out of our environment and help us remediate, to collaborative, where we'll work with you or with the customer to understand what's gone on in the environment. Is it a false positive or is it an active adversary? This 24/7 threat hunting capability really allows MSPs who aren't versed in security operations to now offer that effectively on their paper, where they can offer a 24/7, 365 SOC management of their environment. It will go through an initial onboarding where we determine, is the security posture of the environment appropriate for the risk that they're in, and then we monitor for threat. What we've seen from this team's ability to both detect interesting attacks and adversaries is phenomenal. And then in addition to the managed threat response, maybe you have a customer or a prospect that's been breached just recently or is in the process of being breached, and they don't yet have a SOC. You can call us up for rapid response. That team is effectively going to helicopter into the environment and provide immediate triage, firefighting, getting the adversary out, getting you on path to a healthy state. And that's usually triggered through insurance events. So your insurance vendor would end up paying Sophos for that, but often accounts pay for it directly. And we can get you more information on both rapid response as a boots on the ground, I've been breached, I need help, and MTR, which is sort of the 24/7, 365 continuous security operations monitoring of your environment. We're extremely excited about both of these. They're just growing phenomenally.
That's great, and I think there's a couple of questions that I'll just address and clarify. MTR is not, XG isn't required to use MTR. Basically, MTR is an endpoint SKU, and if you have that endpoint SKU, we have connectors today for XG, for cloud optics, and we'll be adding additional connectors into the MTR stream. There's a lot of conversation internally about where we can add those connectors, whether it's Office 365 or AWS services and so forth. So we're going through that prioritization now to look at what's next from an MTR perspective. I mean, even adding email and adding, mobile and all that other stuff. So I think that's, certainly really positive for MSP, because what we often do is we often say, you guys need to grow with expertise and not adding headcount and the EDR will provide that expertise. It will require headcount from a SOC standpoint. If you want to grow without that headcount component, now you have managed threat response that you can leverage with Sophos. Karl, I know we're a minute over. If you have a couple of minutes, love to.
I do have a few minutes, so I can stay on. And just to be clear, the slide you're seeing here, managed threat response is already available. What this slide is saying is in the XDR timeframe, we're going to have a shared data repository in the cloud. Right now, the managed threat response data lake is separate from what Central sees. So this was saying we're bringing it together, which will facilitate communication and collaboration between the customer, the partner, and the MTR team.
Yep, absolutely. The couple of questions on reporting. Any reporting available today or on the roadmap?
Yeah, so any of the queries that I run, you can export out as a CSV or PDF to build your own reports. With the release of the XDR version of this coming out in February for early access, you'll be able to schedule queries to run effectively as reports and get those available for you as a regular report, which means it's as flexible as you want to write the query. In this case, this is showing a threat indicator report that was run on a regular interval, but it could be your Windows 7 upgrade report or your BitLocker usage report or systems that are running temperature hot or strange geolocations. Whatever you want it to be, it'll show up as a scheduled interval report. The other thing we're seeing with people that want to do more advanced reports is accessing the information with the APIs. So as I said, in December, the APIs for EDR queries come in, and now you can write a Python script that queries the environment for exactly what you're looking for, gives you the results back, and then you can put that into any report format you want.
Yeah, and I think that will allow you to export the report and then white label or brand it or add the MSP logo for the delivery to the customer.
Yeah.
There's a question, is there anything specific for UEFI firmware attacks?
I don't think so. There is some stuff we have down at the OSQuery level for some hardware characteristics that you can get. I don't know if OSQuery has built out anything to go into specific firmware details. Let's see. Back to queries. Well, the real thing is, let's see if I've already written something. Hardware and operating system details, CPU information. So I'll get manufacturer core. I don't think I get firmware details here. If there's a Windows event log on system startup that shows some firmware details, you may be able to get it. And let's see what the other hardware details are. Yeah, this is just going to tell me the build patch levels. I'd have to go here. So let's search OS queries tables. Chassis info, disk info, drivers. I don't think it goes down to the firmware.
Okay. Great. I know there's still a lot of questions coming in, and I want to be very, very respectful of everybody's time. What I'll do is I'll export these questions and I will share them with the team, and we will try to address all these questions. This recording will be saved as soon as we close it, and it will be uploaded to the YouTube page. If you have not looked at the chat, look at the chat window. I pasted probably 4 or 5 links in there to the YouTube page, to the integration page, to the Facebook community page, as well as one other one. I can't remember what it was. We also have our 2021 threat report that's out. If you haven't looked at it, check it out, because what we're trying to do, what I'm trying to do right now is work with the team and produce or extract a lot of the data that you can actually take and use to deliver to your customers, and also use it on social media. So I think that is a really fantastic opportunity. Karl, wanted to thank you so much. I think this was great. The feedback has been absolutely fantastic from the MSPs on the call. Again, if you guys have other questions, or if you need more information, reach out to either your sales engineer, your sales team, your MSP sales team. You can reach out to me directly. We are always available to help you in any way that we possibly can. So I wanted to thank everybody for their time. I don't know about you, but I could watch Karl sit here and browse all day. I think it's amazing technology, but thank you for your time, and we look forward to hopefully
I can get the speculative calculation information for whether or not the chip supports it or not, but I don't think I can get all the firmware details.
Okay. Well, on that note, thank you again, Karl, and thank you everybody for joining, and hopefully in the new year we will be able to see each other in person. Thanks everybody. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Thank you guys.